Thanks for taking the time out to join us here in Mexico.
Sure, my pleasure.
We have a group of international students here, and we're studying North American regional scenarios. And so I wanted to get on a award-winning journalist and author of Family of Secrets, as well as expose the next generation to a role model, because some of these students will be going out into journalism and diplomacy and other type of jobs.
Well, that's a lot of
And
pressure for me.
well, I was listening to some of your lectures online, and you do have a solid reputation, and you check your facts, and so you'd be a good model.
You don't want me
But
you don't want me to speak in Spanish, huh?
no, we have an international group, so half of them don't speak very good Spanish. So
And you're from Croatia, right?
I'm a Croatian American.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, because I was going to say dobro veče.
Ah, okay. So I see you spent some time out there, didn't you?
I lived there for a year and a half in the Balkans.
Ah, okay. um, Perhaps just to start out, if you can tell us a bit of your awakening process and what led you to write this type of material, as well as the type of material you now put out on WhoWhatWhy.com.
Sure. Well, before I became a journalist, when I was actually in my teens, I was politically active. And I think that probably separates me from a lot of people in journalism, that I was already involved in trying to find my own way to make a better country and a better world. And then, when you get into journalism, it's very much of a different kind of a thing, and you're sort of told that you're supposed to be objective, and you're supposed to forget all of those other things. And so I did forget them for a long time, and then after a number of years, I suddenly remembered them again. And I mean, I was always trying to kind of follow my own path and do what I thought was right, but when you go into journalism, as in any field, I think it's true in academia also, you are told to do certain things and not do certain things, and you try to kind of follow the rules. And unfortunately, following the rules helps you professionally, but it does not necessarily help you get any closer to the truth.
Okay, and I saw you. Similar things happened to me in academia as well. But I saw online you also give lectures about things such as cognitive dissonance, which I'll be talking about with some of my students. And perhaps if you could discuss a bit about that.
Sure. Cognitive dissonance is a theory from, as I recall, the 1950s. I think the person who came up with his name was something like Festinger. Now, don't hold me to that. But the basic idea was that we hold certain perceptions and certain notions of how things work, and that when new information is presented to us that conflicts with that, it causes these two things to rub up against each other, and it makes us very, very uncomfortable. And that notion I find constantly throughout my career. What I was saying is that there's a tendency for us to, whatever we believe, and particularly the longer we've believed it, the more we hold those beliefs to be correct. And that means that whenever new information comes along that conflicts with that, it causes us an unpleasant feeling, consciously and especially, I think, unconsciously, and we start resisting it. And so because people are that way, and because cognitive dissonance is very real in everything, when new information has to be presented, it has to be presented very, very gently and in very, very small bits. When you come to people and you say, as I do in Family of Secrets, hey, I discovered that much of what we think to be our history has been falsified, immediately I get attacked.
One of the students brings up a question that they had posted was, there seems to be a fine line between conspiracy theory and the truth, particularly when many of the facts remain unknown to the common citizen. So you seem to navigate that line pretty well.
Well, it's tricky because, first of all, even the term conspiracy theory is one that should be a neutral term, but instead it has been sort of taken over in turn. It's a lot of it's like a lot of these words like terrorist. Terrorist only applies to the other side. Uh, uh, George Bush used a lot of terms when he was running for office, a compassionate conservative, and so on. If you control the language, you control the whole game. And so the term conspiracy theorist has a pejorative or negative connotation because it implies that the person is crazy. But in fact, if you actually study those two words, conspiracy is not a crazy thing. It's a legal term which refers to more than two individuals coming together conspiring to commit a crime, and it's actually prosecuted every day in courtrooms in the United States, and I imagine in Mexico and everywhere else. So that's conspiracy theory. Of course, you're in class, you're learning theories, so learning how to think about things.
Yeah, and one of the documents we look at that brings up a bit of this type of discussion and cognitive dissonance was what we looked at last class. I'm sure you're familiar with Operation Northwoods, yeah?
Sure. Well, I write about it a little bit in Family of Secrets. And by the way, I have now just coming up with new information about it that quite surprised me. This was a real proposal. Now, it is true that the military gives presidents a variety of proposals and options, some of which they perhaps hope that the president won't choose. But this was a very real thing, and it involved a deception against the American people by the government to basically feign an attack as if the attack was coming from outside. But there's a whole history of that. If you go back to, for example, France in the 1800s, there were efforts to what we believe were attacks made against the French government by itself in order to justify clampdowns.
Your book offers a lot of interesting information. I haven't been able to read the whole thing, but there are a lot of things that I've read that I hadn't known before. One of them, for example, which is relevant to some of us here in Mexico, was where you talk about George Bush's business ventures and how they would use business ventures for dual purposes. And early on, they placed people in Pemex, the Mexican national oil company, which eventually led to some people defrauding Mexico for $58 million. So if you could speak a bit about...
I think it was a lot more than that, but one of the things that I found was that, I mean, first of all, the histories of the United States and Mexico have been completely intertwined all the way through. I'm not an expert on that, but I did notice in my research that I was finding the relatives of people surrounding the Bush family involved in Mexico all the way back, in about 1910, around the time of the Mexican Revolution, where you saw them financing various candidates, various armies, and it was all about oil, even back then. So I think we benefit from studying history where we can figure out how it relates to what's going on now.
What is the most surprising piece of information that you've uncovered in your journalistic career? I mean, there's a bunch, but what are a few, I guess?
Well, I mean, I come up with, they're coming at me now almost one a day. So, I think overall the most surprising thing to me was that I had an idea that government actually existed to serve all of us. I still believe that's what it should do, but when I began to discover that that wasn't what it was doing, nor was it intended to do that by many of the people involved or in positions of power, whether in government or in the private sector, I think that was kind of something of a shock to me, because most of our classes are these classes to sort of teaching us about goodness and so forth, and as I look at story after story like Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria and Libya, and when it began to dawn on me that all of these things were about grabbing natural resources, and to really realize that that's what almost all policy of all countries all over the world is about, that was really quite a kind of a mind bender for me. Although, of course, when you think about it, I mean, it does make sense, because when you're running a country, your job is ostensibly to take care of that country's interests, not to go around the world treating democracy or any of those other things that they claim that they do.
Any brave? Okay, we have one. All right.
How old were you? How old were you when you started to do all this investigation, and what made you want to do it?
Let's see. Are you from Australia or something?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, by the way, I've written for some of the Australian papers over the years. Anyway, how old was I when well, so I got involved with politics and political campaigns in a kind of a nerdy way when I was about 12. Um, and then I did all kinds of different things. And then I became a journalist not until my late 20s. I was doing other things. I had a foolish idea that I would try to make some money first. And turns out it's always a good idea to do what you're most interested in. And that turned out to be the journalism. So I really started doing that in my late 20s. And right away, really, I began traveling the world. I went on my own. I took what little savings I had, and I would spot a story going on in Africa or somewhere, and I just jump on a plane on my own, go and do it, and then try to sell the story. So I was really kind of doing that stuff.
Want to come up real quick? We have a German this time.
Hi. What?
Guten Abend.
Guten Abend. I have one question. We read an article today, and it said that in the beginning of Obama's time as president, he promised more transparency, but it's actually the opposite is what happened. And the explanation in the article for that was rather short. Could you maybe say something to that and how that really, how transparent his legacy is?
Sure. Well, two things. First of all, there's another article on the site you might want to read. It's called What Obama is Up Against. And I think if you go in the search box and you put that in quotes, What Obama is Up Against, you'll be able to find it. I believe that's what the title is. And it's basically about how presidents don't actually have the power that we think they do. And I think that's true in Mexico and most other places. People become president because a lot of powerful interests decide that this person will serve their purposes. There are exceptions, and usually when it's an exception, then the following years are all spent with the powerful people trying to get them out of office. But in the case of Obama, I think there was an understanding on his part and on other people's part that he would have to say certain things to the voters when he was running, and then expected to do other things when he was in power. And I think he also realized that he couldn't do much more. We have a history in the United States of presidents being removed from office either through scandals or other problems, or in some cases with a bullet. And in my book, Family of Secrets, I get into what happened to John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon and Jimmy Carter. A lot of the presidents have gotten into trouble when they started going on too independent a course. And I think that's something that we're not supposed to talk about certain danger to somebody who gets in that position and starts antagonizing interests.
On that last point, last week we looked at a bunch of the assassinations that went on in the 60s, and we read James Douglas's JFK and the Unspeakable. You're familiar with that? The first chapter. And we looked at the assassinations of Robert F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King, for which we have a court verdict, right, where U.S. government agencies were responsible for his assassination. And there's a question from a student that says, if the most influential peace promoters end up assassinated, never reaching their potential to eradicate even the slightest bit of evil in the world, do you think struggling for peace is futile, I guess, in a sense? Or perhaps if you have some encouraging words.
Well, that's really an excellent and extremely advanced question. I think that is one of the big questions to ask. I do a lot of public speaking, and I know that people in the audience routinely say that they're both fascinated and horrified by what I have to say, and they wonder if this isn't just also depressing and demoralizing, that then he should just give it up and live a life of self-absorption. But I would argue that anybody who's lived in a place where things got really, really bad, where the secret police came and took people away. Certainly, you've had that all over Latin America, Chile, Argentina, Brazil, and so on. Those people know that you can never hide from bad news, because if it gets bad enough, it's going to come and get you and your family. You have to stand up for what's right, and you have to try to do it while there's an opportunity to do it. I think that in today's world, there is an opportunity to do it. To me, the main thing is to start by arming yourself with information, to study a lot, to read a lot, to think a lot, to figure out how things work, and then to try to spread that information to other people, because the so-called bad guys are depending on the fact that most of us are not interested and don't do anything about what they are up to. And so we're bombarded with entertainment and gossip about celebrities and trivia and sports and stuff about food and what have you. Okay, it's fun, but we fill our lives. And I don't know about you people in that class there, but I can tell you that here in New York, when I go out and sit somewhere in public and I hear what people are talking about, almost nobody seems to be discussing anything really substantive or larger than themselves and their own pleasures. And that is a formula for disaster. That's not the way that we're going to fix the world. We have to take an interest, and that's the first for doing something concrete. But I do think that if we all cared, we would have peace.
Okay, let's see if we have another question from a student. A third brave soul. We have an Australian this time.
I read in the article you mentioned the US plan mentioned by one of the generals to take over the 7 countries in 5 years. Would you be able to elaborate a bit more about that, and on whether any more information has come out about that?
Sure. That is almost entirely based on a claim by one person, General Wesley Clark, who was the commander of NATO years ago. And he says, and we have a video on our website, you can watch him saying that he says that shortly after the 9/11 attacks, he was at the Pentagon in Washington. And at one point, he was pulled aside by someone on the staff who said to him, "General, I think you should know we've received a memo announcing that there are plans for us to invade 7 countries in 5 years, basically with the 9/11 attacks as the excuse." Now, the memo he says, didn't explain what the reason was, and there are various theories about it. I don't know that this is true. I don't know that the memo existed. I don't know that the man who said it was telling the truth. I don't know that General Clark is telling the truth. I doubt that he would make something like that up. And if he didn't make it up, then I suppose it is true.
Okay, any other? I'll throw one in while they're thinking. I believe I read an article recently that the U.S. Dropped substantially on the press freedom ranking, and I guess one of the student questions was, how free do you consider the press of the U.S.?
I think we are still pretty free compared to, let's say, journalists in Mexico whose lives are in great danger on a daily basis. I think we're very, very fortunate, and it kind of doubly disturbs me that given our at least physical safety that we are not gutsier, that we don't take more risks. At the same time, there's no question that situations like with Private Bradley Manning, if you're all familiar with that, that the message is being sent out that anybody who is involved with the release of information that the government doesn't want released faces some kind of punishment. And I think that message has gotten out there, and I think a lot of us kind of head for cover. So I do think that there is a kind of a subtle clampdown on the media.
Have you ever faced any staunch or strong opposition from any interests?
Well, not really. I mean, it wouldn't do any good. I mean, obviously, they'd look at a guy like me and they'd say, "You seem a bit crazy to begin with, so we better not antagonize him." That was a joke, by the way. What I meant was, if you do this kind of journalism, if somebody comes to you and tells you to stop, you're not going to stop. So why would they tell you that? I mean, I think that generally it's more insidious. Like when my book came out, I was supposed to be on all the major TV shows and radio shows, one after another. They just canceled me. And we got the impression that somebody talked to somebody who talked to somebody, and then it was kind of a media, sort of a silence or a chill descended. I think that's more how things work, at least in a country like the United States.
Other questions? All right, another Australian.
Oh my God, is it all Australians?
So many Australians. You talked briefly in your article about supposed links between the CIA and a Saudi family that seem to imply you were skeptical about the official story of 9/11. And I'm just wondering what your theory is about the level of government involvement in the U.S.
I'm very careful on any complex story not to guess or to state an opinion. And on 9/11, we at WhoWhatWhy had never really done much on it, but this particular story appealed to me because it was all based on facts, and I don't think anybody's disputed them. And I hope you get a chance to read it. It's along the right-hand column of the website under Original Investigations, maybe about 3 or 4 stories down. It's quite an interesting story, and just by following that fact trail and looking at this Saudi family who cleared out about 10 days before the planes hit the Twin Towers, the fact that records show that some of the people who supposedly were on those planes as hijackers had been visiting this house or phoning this house, and then we connected the man who owned the house directly to one of the most powerful princes of the Saudi royal family. That I think that facts have to speak for themselves. And that interests me greatly. I don't know what it means, although one has to wonder if that doesn't mean that there was at least some sort of foreknowledge or participation in the planning by at least some members of the Saudi royal family. And then you get to the question of, well, what did the United States government know? And why, if they were aware of this family in this house, has this never come out in the major media? Why has the government never spoken about this? Obviously, there's more going on. It could be just that they're embarrassed or they're covering up their own incompetence. We really don't know, but we need to do a lot more research.
I've got a question or two left, but before I ask them, last call for student questions.
It can be anything. You could ask me what I had for lunch today.
Okay, I don't think you heard him, but he's asking for your recommendation for, I guess, alternative news sources or independent news sources you'd recommend besides WhoWhatWhy.com.
Yeah, I mean, it's problematical for me for the following reason. You can divide almost all the media either into the so-called mainstream or corporate media, where there's a real effort to seem neutral by presenting this one side and the other side, but those people, in fact, often don't really present the other side. They tend to emphasize the establishment viewpoint more. And then there's the so-called alternative media. My problem with the alternative media is because it's ideological or it's partisan. Unless you agree with it, they're not going to give you unbiased information. So there unfortunately are not that many sources out there right now that provide that kind of thing. I think that generally speaking, the Guardian, London often does a good job, and the Independent. I think that the American magazine, which is liberal left, but they do good reporting, is called Mother Jones Magazine. So there are a few, but that's why I started WhoWhatWhy, because I want to grow this into a full-fledged news organization that really gives people answers without an agenda.
I don't see other peers, here in academia doing what I'm doing, but I'm reaching out to authors and taking an alternative approach because, in classes that I've been taught, we never look at stuff like Operation Northwoods or the things you write about in Family of Secrets. And what is some advice, I guess, you can give for students and academics alike? I mean, I assume you lecture at universities as well, no?
I lecture at universities a little bit, but as I think you just implied there, universities themselves are not that open. to cognitive dissonance, let's say, to bold ideas. And people like Howard Zinn and Noam Chomsky, for example, have had difficulties throughout their careers. I salute you for your courage to take on these issues, because I think you're very rare to even be doing this. And I think your students should know that they're lucky to have an instructor such as you, who is courageous enough to talk about these things. One of the problems with academia is that it's part of the establishment. It's largely funded by wealthy people and by traditional institutions. And so while some of the people funding it want to get truth out to people, although in academia there are plenty of good people, and even some of the people who fund it are good, basically the purpose of academia is to turn out what they call good citizens. So they want you to be well educated in terms of skills, and to be able to participate in the system effectively, to be good corporate lawyers, to be good engineers, and good people in computers and in banking and what have you. They're not really looking to educate people who think for themselves, or who so-called make trouble. And so I think this is just a basic problem of the system in general, and in academia and the media, all part of the system, is that we're told that we're supposed to encourage free thinking and to seek the truth, and yet our superiors don't really want us to do that. So I would just say, you can make your own path. It's not going to be easy. If you want an easy life, you'll just toe the line. You'll do what they tell you to do, but I don't know that you'd feel that good about yourself. I personally enjoy what I do. I'm a happy person. I sing, I dance, and laugh, and I feel good about myself. I can look at myself in the mirror, and I'm sure that you can do the same.
Have you seen this video that's just come out that's caused all the riots with the Muslim issue? I was wondering if you have, what are your thoughts on what might come out of this with America and the killing that happened?
Yeah, that video, I mean, when I watched that, it's so terrible in every respect. The quality is so ridiculous that it's either just people who are complete and total fools, or it was deliberately made that way to cause exactly the sort of reaction that it caused. And if the kind of work that I do and the kind of thing I contribute to, you have to always take the Latin phrase "qui bono," which means who benefits. Study these things and think, what is the outcome and who actually benefits from this? Because obviously, the Muslims don't benefit from this. I don't think the Coptic Christians who are associated with benefit from it. And in the end, this kind of thing is just because it seems to me another excuse for more of a kind of a military intervention, and that is the sort of thing I think we need to look at when these types of provocations come along.
I guess I have one final question. Are you working on, do you have any other future book projects in the line, or are you focusing on your website right now?
I actually am working on a new book finally. For several years, people have been bugging me about it. I'm full speed ahead. It kind of continues along the path of deep politics. I started with Family of Secrets. I hope this one doesn't take me 5 years to do.
I hope not either. Well, thanks for your time, and we'll keep up to date on your website, and keep doing what you're doing.
Hey, you too, and good luck to all of you. I think it's exciting that you're involved with these kind of things, and wish I'd had a class like that when I was in college.
Okay. See you guys.